In February 1935, Forbes magazine had a cover story that said, "America's Secret Strength: How to Put Millions to Work." I think that could be a cover story in January of 2017. There are few publications that I look forward to receiving as much as my Forbes magazine. I read them quickly. I tear out those items I want to share with others. Or I go online and forward critically thinking pieces to those members of the faculty and staff at Palm Beach Atlantic University. I suspect that you follow my pattern. Because you are here this evening, it is an indication to me that you cherish the Forbes Media Group and that you greatly admire their pro-business platform. But even more importantly, I suspect, much like me, you have admired the American free enterprise champion, Steve Forbes, who has been at the helm of the Forbes Media Group for many decades. As president of Palm Beach Atlantic University, it's my joy to welcome you to the beautiful DeSantis Family Chapel and to our university community. Today is an important day at Palm Beach Atlantic University because it marks our first day of class for the spring semester of 2017. That's an important day when classes resume after the holiday season. And we're delighted to welcome all of our students back to campus, and we are evenly more delighted to welcome you to this presentation presented by the LeMiuex Center for Public Policy at Palm Beach Atlantic. The LeMiuex Center for Public Policy is one of our 5 centers of excellence, and I direct your attention to your program this evening as well as the university's website, pda.edu, for more information. It is critically important that a public policy center have brilliant, thoughtful leaders. Now, I want to recognize several members of the Board of Advisors of the LeMiuex Center for Public Policy who are present with us tonight. If you are here and a member of the university's Public Policy Center Board of Advisors, would you please stand so we may thank you for your service to the university and your contributions to the LeMiuex Center. Thank you very much. The LeMiuex Center for Public Policy was begun in December of 2012, and one of the focal point projects for the Center of Excellence was to establish an undergraduate, a rigorous undergraduate research program. We call that the LeMieux Fellows Program. And standing to my right are 4 elite Palm Beach Atlantic University students. 2 who contributed to the LeMieux Fellows Program in the spring of 2016, Jeremiah Clark and Cassie Stanton. Jeremiah wrote on drone warfare policy, and Cassie Stanton completed her research on religious liberties. We congratulate them and know that they will do enormously important things in our community and nation based on their experience as LeMieux Fellows. prayer are the new LeMiuex Fellows for Spring 2017. Jen is going to be studying Cuba immigration policy, and Nicole is going to be studying issues surrounding biological and chemical warfare. It is an honor to partner with Senator George LeMiuex with this wonderful public policy center. I also note that this year we have had 3 speakers, including this evening with Mr. Forbes. We've had Senator Bob Graham, and we've had Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. On February the 15th, please mark your calendars, we'll be hosting Mark Halperin of Bloomberg News and Politico. We hope that you will join us again on February the 15th when Mark Halperin is a guest of Palm Beach Atlantic University. Would you join me in welcoming Senator George LeMiuex?
Good evening. It's wonderful to have you here back at Palm Beach Atlantic University. Happy New Year to you. As President Fleming said, this is the 3rd in our series of events this year. We've gone from having 1 signature event a year to this year having 4. I'm extremely grateful to our Board of Advisors who are here tonight. Thank you so much for all that you do for our university and for this Public Policy Center. And I hope that you will mark your calendars, as the President said, for February 15th, when we will have Mark Halperin. And if you've followed Mark Halperin in the past, he is the author of the books that follow the presidential elections, like Game Change. So he's going to be able to give us an insight, being on the ground for this past presidential election with all of the candidates, that I think will be remarkable. So please look forward to that. I also want to recognize one of our very important state officials who's with us tonight, and that's our Commissioner of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Adam Putnam. If you would stand and be recognized, please. Adam is a tremendous public servant and has a lot of great days ahead of him serving the Sunshine State. I want to now introduce our speaker for this evening. Before we came over here, we had a chance to speak with the President's Lyceum, which is a group of students that spend time with the President meeting people who are thought leaders. And when I introduced Mr. Forbes, I talked about the fact that he had run for president twice before, and that he has been a thought leader, and that there are different kinds of people who run for office. There are candidates who are all about their identity and who they are, maybe their persona. And then there are candidates that are idea candidates. And Steve Forbes was an idea candidate. The idea of a flat tax, of flattening the tax system and making it fairer and rejuvenating the American economy with it. And even after his time as a candidate for president, he has been a person who has pushed ideas. And the power of those ideas are very striking. And I mentioned to the students, because we try to mentor and educate these great leaders who are going to help us in the future that are coming from Palm Beach Atlantic, that oftentimes it takes a long time for your ideas to bear fruit. And I think that you will see with this new Republican Congress and Republican president, many of the ideas that Steve Forbes has been advocating for years coming to fruition. So it's my great privilege to introduce you tonight the chairman and an editor-in-chief of the Forbes Media Group, Mr. Steve Forbes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator LeMiuex, for those very, very kind words. And we had a chance to talk a little bit earlier. I don't want to get him in trouble, but I think his contributions to public service are not at an end, but are really taking a detour, and is going to be back again. And it is good fun to be here tonight, particularly in a renowned university, young but vigorous and on the cutting edge, because it gets to really a simple but profound question. And that is, and people like Tom Sowell and George Gilder asked this question, and that is, what is the difference between us human beings today and people of the Stone Age? After all, same planet, same resources, same appetites, same human bodies. What's the difference between them and us? Basic. We know more. We have more knowledge. And you can suffer great disasters, physical disasters, destructive wars, but if knowledge is not destroyed, you can rebuild and move forward. We saw that after World War II. Europe and Japan devastated, tens of millions of people killed, massive physical devastation. Experts thought it'd be generations before those parts of the world could recover. But thanks to the US military umbrella and knowledge not being destroyed, Western Europe and Japan, within a few years, exceeded pre-war production. Knowledge was not destroyed. You see it too in today. If you come from California, you hear a lot about water shortages. There are no water shortages in California. What is lacking in California is common sense. The ability... And by contrast to California's water shortage, you go to, say, the state of Israel, which is in a desert, where rainfall has been declining over the years. They don't have a water shortage. Why? Because of knowledge and the use of knowledge and creativity. For example, the modern state was founded in 1948. Since 1948, the population has increased more than tenfold, agricultural output more than 16-fold, industrial production more than 50-fold. Yet the net use of water, not per capita, but the net use of water in Israel today is 10% less than it was in 1948. Why? Simple things. Sensible conservation. You have a shower head in Israel, feels like ours, but uses 1/3 of the water. Agriculture, drip technology, way ahead of the rest of the world. So they just don't throw the water around, they apply it in a very value-added way. But a big thing is desalination plants. They turn water and reuse it again. California, Israel has several of these things. By contrast, in California, they finally completed one. It took about 15 years, cost 3 times what it would in Israel because of all these crazy regulatory obstacles, and has about 1/2 of the capacity. That is a self-inflicted shortage, not something ordained from on high. So knowledge is the key. And this also gets to the obvious follow-on, and that is the real source of capital in a society is not physical things, it's the human mind. The human mind. And knowledge comes, we were talking about at the Lyceum that the senator mentioned earlier, knowledge comes from constant experimentation, whether it's in the laboratory, marketplace, wherever. Much constant failure. If you want to see an area of the country where the failure is enormous amounts of business failures, it's not inner city America, it's not Baltimore, it's not Detroit, it's Silicon Valley. Constant churn there, things that don't work, but constantly learning, and eventually you get it right, and we all benefit from it. So another thing, if you allow free markets, whether it's in healthcare or anything else, if allowed to operate, will always turn scarcity into abundance, will always turn today's luxuries into tomorrow's commodities. For example, we still drive cars. I don't know how long that's going to last, but we still drive these things. A typical car 120 years ago, when you adjust for inflation, cost over $100,000. It was a toy for the rich. Then along comes Henry Ford, gifted set of engineers, perfects what they call the moving assembly line, turn a toy for the rich into something every working person could afford. You see it too in handhelds, mobile devices, cell phones, whatever you call these things. The first one came from Motorola in the early 1980s, 35 years ago, was big as a brick, mean, a shoebox, weighed like a brick, had about a 40-minute battery life. And the first one cost $3,995. Today, many of them are giveaways, depending on what program you sign up with. Now you have to lease these things, apparently. But you're soon going to get a smartphone for as little as $100, and it's gone way beyond telephony. The only thing these things don't do now is perhaps grow hair for some of us, but maybe they'll perfect that too. Soon going to be $50 for these computers in our hands, whole world at our fingertips. And so it's the human mind. You take, for example, a natural resource. They call oil a natural resource. It's not a natural resource. In and of itself, it's just gooey stuff. It's glop. You know, you can't eat it, you can't drink it, you can't feed it to camels. I mean, it's just goo. What turned this goo into something a modern society can't live without is human ingenuity. You take the symbol of the modern era, the microchip, silicon, sand. Who knew when you're at the beach here? No shortage of sand. That would be the basis of instruments that literally brings the whole world to your fingertips. It's amazing how spoiled we get with this stuff. I'm old enough to remember a thing called card catalogs. Some of you may remember those. Libraries. Now you just go online. Boom, search engine. Done. Amazing. Or we're so spoiled now that if we place a call to Outer Mongolia, it takes more than 6 seconds. We say, what a piece of crap. It takes how long it takes to get out there. Terrible, terrible. So in terms of where we're at today, there's a lot of talk in the world, about this era we're going to have, where we're going to have to suffer continued slow growth, that what some economist, Larry Summers, calls secular stagnation, as if some aliens have come along and we're doomed to stagnate, and nonsense like that. These are self-inflicted wounds. There's no reason why we should be stagnating. It's because of policy errors, and the good news about errors is they can be corrected. We don't have to put up with them forever. These are self-inflicted wounds, and we do that from time to time. But in this country, we don't tolerate failure, so we'll continue to try things. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else until we get it right. So what I'd like to do tonight is hit several areas where I think reform is coming, and it's very basic, but it's something, yardsticks you can have, metrics you can have to see if we're going to get out of this self-inflicted rut that we've been in for almost 15 years. And you look around the world, the U.S. economy is starting to get a little better, but still stuck in second gear. Around the world, it's even worse. No one seems to be getting it right. China has nominally high growth rates. How real they are, who knows, but not what they used to be. Europe, enough said. Brazil, Mexico, all struggling. So what in the world is going on? And the reason that this stuff is important, getting the economy right, is that if you don't get prosperity, if people feel that they can't move ahead, then the politics takes a turn for the worse. You're seeing it all around the world, frustration. You see it in Europe, you're seeing it in Japan, you're seeing it elsewhere. People wondering, why can't we move ahead? And if people don't think those in authorities know what they're doing, they're going to try things that may not be so pleasant. We saw this in the 1930s when there was a period of hopelessness. We saw a little bit in the 1970s till Reagan came along. Things started to look like around the world until he came along that we're in this perpetual rut. So let me hit on 4 big areas to look out for. One, of course, is, and by the way, one other thing, I have to hit this secular stagnation stuff. There's a lot of worry about robots. They're going to do everything for us. We should rejoice that, tell the kid to pick up the room, the robot will do it, so you know the thing will get clean. These things can be blessings. And by the way, robots have been around forever. Not forever, but for a long time. We just didn't call them robots. One of them is called washing machines. They do the washing you had to do by hand. Dishwashers, same thing. One of the biggest ones, agriculture of interest to this state, was the invention of the tractor. Literally freed up tens of millions of acres that had been devoted for forage for farm animals to growing food for we humans. So this has been ongoing. And if you have a vibrant free market, then these things lead to a higher standard of living. and you don't have permanent displacement, the fears that afflict us today. So let's start with some of the big, the four big things. One is regulation, I'll get to that, but let me start with three biggies. One is taxation. One of the things that people in authority don't seem to understand is that taxes just don't raise revenue, they're also a price and a burden. A tax you pay on income, price you pay for working, tax on profit, the price you pay for being successful, tax on capital gains, the price you pay for taking risks that work out. It's very simple. When you lower the price of good things like productive work, risk-taking success, you'll get more of them. Raise the price, you get less of them. So on this tax bill that's going to be going before Congress, and we'll see what the Trump administration decides to do, but they got to go big and go bold. They'll say, oh, it'll increase the deficit and all that kind of stuff. No, if you get this economy vigorously growing, that solves a lot of problems. They forget that when you have a vigorous economy, the balance sheet grows. Balance sheet, the asset side grows, makes the liabilities a lot easier to deal with than when you have stagnation. So go big. Do some simplification. Cut the rates. Cut the corporate rate from 35%, which is one of the worst in the world, to 15%. Make it one of the best. Make it not just for corporations, but pass-throughs like partnerships and LLCs and S-corps and the like. Do it. I don't care what it's going to cost. It'll really bring prosperity and capital coming into this country, not out of default because there's nothing else better out there, but for positive reasons. This is the place you want to be, like it was in the 80s and part of the 90s. Go for it. On the personal side, do the personal side as well as the business side. There's a lot of talk among Republicans, oh, maybe we should postpone the personal side for a few months. No, do it at the same time and make it retroactive. What you want to do is make it big and bold so that people see immediately change is coming. You can see it in your paycheck. You can see it in things starting to churn in a positive way in society. Go for it. And so I ultimately hope that they're not going to get a flat tax this round, and eventually we have to get one, just to put our current tax code in perspective. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, which defined the character of the American nation, was all of 272 words. Constitution, amendments, a little over 7,000 words. The Bible, which took centuries to put together, 773,000 words. Now, the federal income tax code and all the attendant rules and regulations, you have to include those, as any tax attorney will tell you, more than 10 million words and rising. And nobody knows what's in it. The IRS doesn't know. You call their hotline if they deign to answer it. 1/4, 1/3 of the time they'll give you the wrong answer, hold you responsible for it. Several years ago, Money Magazine did a survey. They took a hypothetical family's finances, gave the numbers to 46 different tax preparers, people considered expert in the field, and asked them to do the family's tax return. And you know what they got back? 46 different returns, 46 different estimates, thousands of dollars of difference, this from people who make their living at the thing. It's crazy. And it's also a moral issue. So I hope that, yes, they'll do this good tax cut, then in 3 or 4 years, like Reagan did, he did one big tax cut in his first year, 1981, 5 years later, and a really big one. Hope Trump will do the same thing. Start with a big one now, but do a big sweeping one, flat tax. And he's indicated favor of this. In a few years, when things start to move in the right direction, people are in a mood for doing even bigger things. And go ahead and do it. You know, flat tax simply means you throw the whole code out. I was going to say bury it, but I can't do that. The EPA would probably consider it too toxic. You'd have to get an environmental statement to do it. But get rid of the code. Put in a simple rate. I propose in my book, Reviving America, 17%. Generous exemptions for adults and for kids. A family of 4, your first $52,800 of salary would be free of federal income tax. Free, $52,800. Above that, 17 cents on the dollar, no tax on savings and no death tax. You should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS. You've been through enough on this earthly existence. And do it that way. And we were discussing with the Senate, it's a moral issue. You know, the IRS estimates that we spend 6 billion hours a year filling out tax forms. Experts estimate we spend over $200 billion a year complying with this unnecessary thing. If you had a flat tax, you could literally do your tax return on a single sheet of paper, a few keystrokes on a computer, 40 countries and jurisdictions like Hong Kong have already done this. What are we waiting for? But go back 20 years. Go back 20 years. Think of all the tens of billions of hours and trillions of dollars and immense brain power that's been applied to this corrupt, corrosive, incomprehensible tax code. And think of a moment if that money had gone for new products, new services, new medical devices, new cures for diseases, how much better off we'd all be. What economists call opportunity loss, as Trump would say, huge. It's huge. And it's immoral that we constrain ourselves like that. Now, one thing to watch out for is a thing called, and this came from Republicans, I can't believe it, it's called the border adjustment tax. You probably haven't heard of it, but it's a bad thing. Border adjustment tax, long story short, will in effect be a sales tax on imports. So if, say, Mercedes has a big plant, produces almost 300,000 cars a year in South Carolina, manufacturers, but they import, like everyone does, a lot of parts for these vehicles. The parts that they import will no longer be able to deduct for tax purposes, which will sharply raise the price of cars, sharply raise the price of what you buy at Walmart or Target. Gallon of gasoline, go up 30 cents a gallon. And then they have subsidies for exports. So if I sell $1 million piece of machinery to Iran, I make a profit on it, I don't have to pay tax on it. So why are we subsidizing foreign customers and taxing American customers? I don't quite get it. They say, well, we'll raise money for other kinds of tax cuts. Well, putting in a new tax is a dangerous thing, even if you think it's for a good purpose, because the bad guys will eventually get back in and they will drive it up. Whether it's a value-added tax or what they call this border adjustment tax, just boo it, hiss it, and tell your representatives don't go for it. Just go for a simple tax cuts that we've done in the past and we know that work, border adjustment tax. So watch out for that one. I can't believe the Republicans, but you know, strange things happen among people from time to time, and you just have to get them cured before they do something really dangerous. So, but on the tax front, I think good things are going to begin to happen. Another big thing, of course, is health care. 20% of our economy. And before I go into health care, let me just give one piece of advice so you get at least one good thing tonight. Mammograms. 40%, 45% of women have what they call dense tissue. And mammograms are not very good at detecting early stages of cancer with dense tissue. There's a solution. Mayo Institute, Mayo Clinic has done research on this. It's called MBI, molecular breast imaging. Not traditional mammogram, MBI. So this is not three-dimensional mammograms. This is the stuff that works, and they found in their research that it's more effective in detecting early-stage breast cancer in women with dense tissue 3 to 4 times than mammograms. So your doc may not be aware of it, which gets to a problem in healthcare. This information is very slow to make the rounds, but MBI, remember it and insist on it if it can work for you. Even though they say, oh, it'll cost more, well, a few $100 extra to save your life, not a bad investment. Insist on it. Okay, healthcare. Healthcare, step back for a moment quickly and ask yourselves, why do we have a healthcare crisis? And the answer is, it's not quality of healthcare. Overall, we have the best in the world in the United States, overall. But they say people like me are getting older, we want more of it, prices go up, and so we have a crisis. Demand for healthcare is a crisis. But ask yourselves a very simple question. Why is growing demand for healthcare, for medicine, considered a crisis, whereas growing demand for anything else in this economy is considered a great opportunity? People want more cars and trucks. Detroit and other manufacturers glad to come to your assistance. People want more apps. Writers glad to help you out. You want more food, as if we need it. A lot of vendors glad to help you out. So what's with healthcare? Why is demand for healthcare considered a crisis, whereas demand for anything else is considered a great opportunity? The basic answer is we don't have real free markets in healthcare. There's a disconnect between providers and consumers, between doctors and patients. Nobody designed this system. It's not evil people. It grew up, we explain in the book, out of World War II, regulations and tax changes. But anyway, we have this system today where clinics and hospitals know their revenues depend on how well they negotiate with third-party payers, insurance companies, government, employers, not you, the patient. And that's why we have this crazy system, all top-down. They keep putting new regulations to deal with problems like whack-a-mole, problem here, whack, 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 new ones rise up, which is why physicians today, docs today, spend 30% of their time filling out forms. Hospitals drowning in all these regulations that nobody looks at, all the paperwork and computer inputs and the like. It's crazy, and nobody's happy with this system. You go to a hospital, you feel you better have a relative or a friend there to look out for you, make sure that everything is done right. So again, it's not quality of people. We've got fantastic brains there, but it's the way this system has evolved. And the proof of where the patient is, you go to a clinic or hospital and you ask in advance what it costs, the treatment, you're going to get a very strange look. It means one of two things. Either you're uninsured or you're crazy. Why would you want to know the price? Insurance will take care of it, maybe. And they have this crazy system where, 3 years later, you're still getting bills for stuff you can't even understand. Keeps coming in. Crazy system. And to show where the patient really lies in that food chain, customers everywhere else are kings and queens. They control the market, ultimately. But where the patient lies in this food chain can be seen by this little fact. The lousiest, crummiest motel in America wouldn't dare put you in a room with another guest with a curtain in between. A sick guest. Think of it. Because you don't count the way you should. Now that's beginning to change. That's beginning to change. One is the rise of high deductible policies. I don't think President Obama knows he's undermined socialized medicine with these exchanges, with these catastrophic deductibles, $10,000, $15,000. Suddenly people may have the insurance, but they have less accessibility than ever before. But people are suddenly conscious of what these things are being charged for. So what you're going to see happen is more and more price consciousness, which is going to force providers to start paying more attention to patients. I'll give you one little example of how, I'm going to give you two examples. One is in terms of pricing. Because you don't see the price, you get strange things. I was in New Hampshire a few months ago with an entrepreneur, and he had some heart problems a couple of years ago, so he goes to the cardiologist. Cardiologist, among other things, says you should have a nuclear stress test. They put something in you and see how it flows, whatever. And so in all innocence, he asked, what does it cost? Doc says, I have no idea. Why would I know? Insurance will cover it. This guy, being an entrepreneur and therefore not taking things as they are, went out on his own, got the codes, and after months of work, got the prices of 25 different clinics and hospitals in the region, New England region. And the prices ranged from $1,400 to $7,300 for the same test. But nobody knows. Prices aren't posted. So, end of the story, that story, he goes back to the doc, says, I'll do the $1,450 variety. And the cardiologist says, what? This costs $1,400? He said, I had no idea. Then he gets up, does some calculations, and says, there's only a 2% chance this is going to help at all. Let's just drop it. So among the reforms that I think you're going to see coming, in no particular order. One is nationwide shopping for health insurance. Right now, it's all state markets. You want scores of companies competing for your business, not just one or two or three. Get real competition. Have hospitals post their prices. Medicare can dictate that. Have hospitals post each month how many patients die from infections received after they're admitted to the hospital. National scandal there. In many of those institutions, avoidable deaths. Huge. Allowing you to choose your own insurance policy. For example, I don't need pregnancy services. Thank you very much. but I have to still pay for them under the crazy rules we have now. Basic things like that, and you'll start to see the market change. Just give you one little example of what's coming. A crazy guy, great entrepreneur, named Keith Smith, in Stillwater, Oklahoma, opened several years ago a hospital called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. They don't do insurance. They post prices, all inclusive. None of this stuff, oh, we didn't put that in the package. It's all there. He now can hire the best surgeons in the country, and his prices are so cheap that the state of Oklahoma is now urging state employees to go there, to the Surgery Center for Surgery, because the prices there are lower than what the reimbursements are and the costs of Medicare and Medicaid. That's what happens when you get real free markets and productivity. We do it in food. We do it in food. We've got safety nets for food, food stamps. Put aside how it's administered, that's a different question. But the basic premise is you will have basic provisions. If you have problems, chronic conditions, you can be covered. You don't have to change the whole system. You just have the laser-like approach. You got a problem, we'll deal with it. High-risk pools and the like, so nobody goes without. And allow more entrepreneurship and turning scarcity into abundance, lower prices. So on that, in terms of what happens, Obamacare will be repealed, but the key thing is, what do you do in terms of afterwards? So you get rid of the employer mandate, individual mandate, all the crazy things that are hurting, and start moving towards, and there's some of the Republicans are proposing, I hope they run with it, things like high-risk pools and things. So people, we keep the safety nets. Don't mess with Medicaid now. You don't have to. You don't have to. If you get real free markets and the 150 million people who are not on Medicaid and not on Medicare, I guarantee you, as Keith Smith said it, some have pointed out, you get a real free market. People are going to say, why are we segregated in Medicare? Why can't we participate in this low-price, great choices out there system? So you don't attack something that people feel is a lifeline. Give them more attractive alternatives. That's what free markets are about. Now, regulations. Regulations cost this economy $2 trillion a year. And most of them are not necessary. Just to give you an example of how crazy this situation is. Peanuts. You buy, or nuts. I'm not talking about in Washington, but the things you eat. The can of nuts you buy. Do you realize there's a federal law that says that the picture of the nuts on the label have to be in descending order of size? Why? Why? They do. A lot of you have doggies. You have these leashes now, great flexible leashes, so if the pooch can run out, you're not choking the pooch. But if you go on federal land and your leash is longer than 6 feet, you violated federal law. And it goes on and on. Pipe tobacco smokers, I'm not talking about what you get in Colorado, but the old kind of pipe smoking. Once upon a time, that was a sign of a great intellect, puffing on a pipe. Now you think, oh, this guy's old, when's he going to get with it? But people still smoke pipes. And they like to go to tobacconists and fool around with various kinds of tobaccos, mix them up, try a little bit of this, try a little bit of that, always trying to get new variations. Soon going to be where tobacconists, the FDA has its way, will have to register as tobacco manufacturers if they mix different kinds of pipe tobaccos for a customer. And it just goes on and on and on. So one of the good news things is Trump is going to use the pen, as Obama put it, and start deregulating. Start with allowing the Keystone Pipeline if they still want to build it, and based on a lot of the things that are crushing especially small businesses. And it's not just the particular regulations, it'll be the environment that will gradually be created where you don't feel Washington's always trying to find ways to make your life more miserable. If you're trying to create jobs, do things, it's going in the opposite direction. Good place to go, good place to move. And so that is critical, and they're going to make serious efforts at it. And the key to seeing how serious they are is some of these regs, crazy regs, have to be repealed by an act of Congress. There's a mechanism there for it. It takes one day of legislative time in the Senate to do it, but if in the next couple of years they're serious about it, you can just carve out the time and start whacking away at this stuff. And also pass a law, Senator LeMieux is familiar with it, that if you agency wants a new regulation, that's going to cost the economy more than $50 or $100 million a year, it can propose it, but Congress has to pass it. Not have the right to veto, but has to pass it. So elected representatives take responsibility. Because you know, in Congress they pass about 120 laws a year. Regulatory agencies pass the equivalent of 3,000 laws a year. Time to get more oversight and accountability there. Now the final area, and by the way, if you want to see how bad this whole criminal code and regulatory thing in Washington is, you can get a book written by a lawyer in Massachusetts called Harvey Silverglate called 3 Felonies a Day. Because there are 300,000 different rules and regs that have the force of federal law, 300,000, if you're in a position of responsibility, you're probably committing, without you knowing it, in all innocence, several felonies a day. Rule of law, that is not tolerable. Now, one final thing, and I saved it for last, because the exit is a prospect now, so there's relief coming, is monetary policy. Now, when you say monetary policy, Federal Reserve, the eyes already get heavy. Oh, God, how boring. And it is. It's not 50 Shades of Gray. This is not going naked in the jungle. This is not exciting stuff. But it is important stuff because you can get the regs right, you can get the spending right, you can get the taxes right, the health right. If you don't get the money right, you're going to have problems. Why? Because how do we make progress? We do it by buying and selling with each other, exchanging with each other. Money makes that easy. Makes doing transactions easier. In the old days, they had barter. Imagine we had barter today, trying to deposit a cow into an ATM or withdrawing a tractor. I mean, just is very impractical. So money makes it easier. And so in the next 2 minutes, as a reward for what I'm about to do for you in the next 2 minutes, let me give you a travel tip, advance reward, discussing monetary policy. If you ever find yourself in an airplane, in coach, middle seat, on the runway, watching your life pass away, you want a little bit of elbow room with your seatmates, start talking to them about monetary policy. They'll cut you a wide berth if they don't remove you from the plane. But it is essential. And the thing to remember about money is not wealth. Money measures wealth. Money measures value. You know, in wintertime, you go to a restaurant, you park your coat, check your coat, you get a coat check, piece of plastic or a piece of paper. That piece of plastic or paper is worthless in and of itself, but it's a claim on a real product. You buy a ticket, whether it's ellipses on your handheld or a piece of paper, worthless in and of itself, but it's a claim on a real thing. Money's like a claim check. It's a claim on products and services that people have created. So it measures value, the way scales measure weight, or clocks measure time, or rulers measure space. And money works best when it has a fixed value, just as you have fixed weights and measures in the marketplace. When you go buy a gallon of gasoline, you assume it's the same gallon today as it was yesterday and will be the same tomorrow. You buy a pound of cheese. That doesn't float each day. 16 ounces one day, 14 the next. Just imagine for a moment, and we'll close this, imagine for the moment the Federal Reserve was put in charge of the Time Bureau. And so they decided to float the clock. 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes the day after, 96 minutes the day after that. You know, life would be chaotic. You want to bake a cake. It says bake the batter 30 minutes. You have to figure out, are those nominal minutes? Are those inflation-adjusted minutes? Are they a Florida minute, a New York minute, a Mexican minute? But that's what they do with money, with all this crazy floating. Fix the dollar. Fix the dollar. Now, this will sound very strange, but we should do what we did for the first 180 years of our country's existence. That is, fix the dollar to gold. It doesn't mean you use gold as gold coins. It just means you fix the value of the dollar. Gold, for a variety of reasons, we explain in the book, Reviving America, keeps its value, intrinsic value, better than anything else, better than silver, copper, you name it. 4,000 years. Not perfect, but the best we have, like the North Star. And so when you see the price fluctuate, that's not the value of gold fluctuating. That is the dollar fluctuating. That is the yen fluctuating, the euro fluctuating, not gold. We did it for 180 years. That 180 years encompassed a civil war, 2 world wars, great inflation, other disasters, yet we had achieved in that 180 years the highest average rate of growth of any nation or state in history. If we'd maintained those growth rates in the last 40 years that we did for 180 years through all of this turmoil, our economy today would be 50% larger. Ponder that. You're making $50,000 a year. Imagine what it would be like if you had $75,000 a year, $80,000 a year. Missed opportunity. Over time, that accumulates, that slow growth. Because how do we move ahead? We make investments. That's how we get new things. Investing's risky enough, but if you don't know if you're going to get paid back in a 100-cent dollar, 80-cent dollar, 10-cent dollar, $10, you get less investment. Last 15 years, when we've really gone off the rails on this, business investment has stagnated. They've gone in for financial engineering, buying stuff back instead of creating the new factories and the new businesses. And get the Fed stop manipulating interest rates. That's price controls. Let lenders and borrowers set the rates instead of Washington bureaucrats. Right now, businesses, small businesses find it very hard to borrow. Very unsecure lines of credit because the banking system makes it so expensive to do it. Regulation stands in the way. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. So if you look at whether it's regulations, healthcare, taxes, and the like, basic reforms, basic free market reforms. And this country will take off like a rocket, and make no mistake, I know this is not politically correct to say, but maybe can say it here, get out alive. If America gets in trouble, the rest of the world is in trouble. If America gets it right, the rest of the world has a chance to get it right. That is our fate and our opportunity. Let's make it an opportunity rather than something to be ashamed of, something to be proud of, and do as we've done in the past. Show people the way, and we'll all be the better off for it. Thank you very much.
So we're going to conclude tonight with a few questions, some of which I have prepared and some of which have come from the crowd. There's probably, Mr. Forbes, an unending amount of things to talk about with the exciting times that we're living in. The president-elect will be sworn in next Friday, had his first press conference today, which was extremely lively, to say the least. I wanted to ask you, as a person who's always advocated for free market principles, we've had a couple of issues that the president-elect ran on this year that are sort of outside the orthodoxy of what traditionally Republicans have advocated. One of them is on the issue of trade. You talked a moment ago about that tax that's being considered on border transactions. What's your view of some of the trade rhetoric that happened during the campaign? Do you think that we're going to see tariffs placed in on the imports of goods from other countries? And what would be your advice to the president-elect on these issues?
Well, first of all, tariffs are a word for taxes. Think of it as a sales tax. So you're going to pay for it if those taxes are enacted. And in terms of trade, there are abuses out there, but the remedies are already there. This current administration, soon to be former administration, did not bother to enforce the laws and the agreements that are already there. Enforce them. For example, many of our companies can't compete freely in China. If they consider you a critical area, they will block you, and they'll try to get your know-how. Cybersecurity, same thing. Violating our dumping laws. Those laws have been on the books since the 1980s. So you don't have to have a trade war. You don't have to blow up the system. You just have to enforce what's there now. I think we'll solve most of the problems. And if they do violate and they won't cure it, there are remedies there now where you go to the WTO, they allow you to put tariffs or sanctions on certain products. So you don't get what we had in the 30s where you had taxes on tens of or thousands of products. It'll be just a handful to make the message. We've done that in the past. We've had these things since the 1950s. So I think it's the lack of enforcement that needs to be addressed. You don't have to do a lot of new things. And if you do what he's proposing in terms of regulations, especially on the tax side, getting 15% corporate rate, you're going to see capital flooding into this country. flooding into this country. And just as we were in the 80s, we're the font of technology. Silicon Valley became a byword for cutting-edge innovation and technology. That's the positive way to do it, instead of what we had in the 30s, where we had a trade war, and that, of course, led to eventually the shooting war. So there's a positive way to do it. Abuse is there, yes. I think we have the remedies there. And in terms of NAFTA and things like that, if they need some tweaking, this is dull work, but you can go in there and do some tweaking. And no agreements that was negotiated. The first one was the free trade agreement with Canada in 1986. 30 years, maybe it needs some updating. You update it. And you don't have to make a big deal of it. Everyone knows now it's going to be an issue. You deal with it. And as for the thing about what he does with GM and Carrier, and, companies like that, there's no way you can, then you're going to really turn around the economy with that. What I think he's doing there is telling his supporters who feel that this economy's left them behind, I remember why I was elected. And these are acts to show I'm not forgetting you. Yes, in and of themselves, they won't amount to much, a few hundred jobs there, 1,000 jobs, but we're going to do big things. So I think it's in that sense you should see the thing, not as an end in and of itself, but I'm serious about improving things.
So you have a new book out, Reviving America. We can get this like on Amazon, right, and at the bookstore, right? So make sure you pick one up. There's a lot of really good ideas in here for members of Congress, policy leaders, things that you discussed tonight: repealing Obamacare, reforming the tax code, getting monetary policy right. But it seems to me, with ideas being so clear and clearly presented, that we have a system in Washington where members of Congress don't seem to get a lot done. And one of the questions from our audience tonight is, do we need to change the rules of the game for members of Congress? Do we need to have term limits? Do we need to change the structure of our government so that more is accomplished in Washington, D.C.?
You have to make, first of all, I like term limits. Some of the advocates say 6 years. I say 8 years for the House, 12 for the Senate. Be fine. But the key thing is that things are done in Washington, but they're done by bureaucratic fiat and by regulatory agencies 3,000 times a year, and very silly stuff and destructive stuff than stuff that comes out of Congress. So Congress doesn't do basic stuff, but regulatory agencies are doing a lot of destructive things. One example is the internet. Thanks to what President Obama did a year ago with the Federal Communications Commission, the internet for the moment is now operating, and it's already affected investment, on a regulatory structure that was created for dial-up phones in 1932. It's insane. And so have the new FCC. The chairman thankfully has resigned. Trump can appoint new people, do it, get rid of that kind of stuff. Also, I hope they find a way to undo allowing the governance of the internet to be done by an international committee, i.e. Russia, China, and others, instead of the Commerce Department. We did a very nice job. Don't muck it up with others getting in the game with their own anti-free speech proclivities. You know, China employs hundreds of thousands of people trying to control the internet. I guess I'd rather have them doing that than joining the army. But we cannot lose control of the internet. So in terms of what needs to get things done, you need to have develop the consensus about what needs to be done. And that's why among Republicans now there is a consensus. Got to do something on the tax side. And a lot of Democrats, if no one's bad as listening from their base, will agree, certainly on the business side, things have to be done. So I think there's a consensus there. It takes leadership. One of the failings of Obama was that he did not know how to negotiate the way Reagan did, the way Bill Clinton did. And so you're not going to get everything you want, but when you get something done, it's going to be far more permanent and have far more legitimacy than if it's seen as being rammed down your throat. And so people always cite Ronald Reagan and the Speaker of the House at the time, Tip O'Neill. They did not like each other. Tip O'Neill thought Reagan was a dunce, which tells you something about Tip O'Neill's judgment. Reagan thought O'Neill was just a hack. Yet, because they had both had a sense of responsibility and opportunity, they put together what came to be a fantastic tax bill that swept through both houses of Congress. So that's how you get things done. Leadership, willing to sit down, make things happen. Reagan said, if I get 70 or 80%, I'm going with it. I don't have to have 99%. I'll take 70 or 80, like he did with taxes in 81, and then come back again a few years later when the opportunity's right, and then you push it forward. Have that sense of direction. So yes, term limits, good, because you do get infected after a while there. I wish the EPA would study the water in Washington, why good people go there and strange things happen to them. But George was only there 2 years, so the virus didn't hit him. So yeah, term limits, but also develop a consensus. And on health care, for example, because we've grown up with the system, we don't realize how strange a system it is. And I think as people learn more and more that you can have more patient control, you don't have to be a physician to make decisions on what kind of insurance you have, just as I don't have to be an engineer to buy an iPad and have the thing work, or a physicist or something to buy an automobile. I turn the key, iPad, I hit the thing with fingers, and things happen. And that's what you want to do in healthcare, where it's already presented to you what your choices are in a very clear way. And again, on hospitals, we should know. Now, we understand when you're sick, you're very prone to things like infections, very high-risk diseases, that we get that. But there are ways of developing metrics so we can make a distinction between where they're just not doing basic things they should do and where you're taking high-risk patients. And again, when people get that kind of information, they act on it very quickly. Like that MBI thing I explained to you earlier. How many women knew about MBI? I bet you hardly any of you did. Whereas in a normal free market, Apple does something, Samsung and others quickly follow suit. Ford does something, other manufacturers quickly follow suit. We're going to do it better. You don't get that in medicine. We got to get that in medicine, that kind of a transparency and information.
One of the questions that was asked from one of our attendees tonight has to do with what challenges might face the president-elect. You ran for the presidency as a business person, sort of foreshadowing the campaign of President-elect Trump. What unique challenges might he face not being of politics, trying to preside over the federal government?
Well, this is a very tricky thing because you want to understand the system, but you don't want to become, as they say, go native. So you want to keep an anthropological attitude towards this part of the world. Understand it so you can navigate within it, but not identify with it without you even knowing it. So I think learning to, he's going to have to, first of all, do some sitting down with Paul Ryan. And I hope he says no border adjustment tax. Why get in a fight? The retailers are up in arms about this thing. Boeing loves it because it means they wouldn't pay any taxes. So why set up these fights early on when not now? Do that kind of stuff later. So I hope, but back and forth. Now, initially, you're not going to get a lot of Democrats peeled away. You'll get some, as you know, next cycle, 2018. 25 Democrat senators are coming up, only 8 Republican senators. 10 of those are in red states. So the Democrats, I think, will be more of a mind to be on the right side than they might have been in the previous 8 years. So there's opportunity, and then you build on it, as Reagan did, passed the first tax cut, respectable margin, but not great, peeled off enough Democrats, but 86, bigger tax change, it swept through. So that's what you have to do. Don't go native, understand, and don't do what Obama did where he just wouldn't cut a deal. Just give you one final example on that. In 2011, when we nearly defaulted on the national debt because we wouldn't raise the ceiling, and so Obama and the Speaker of the House, Boehner, sat down and negotiated, and nothing happened. Boehner said he keeps moving the goalposts. Obama said Boehner's no good. And finally, the one thing Harry Reid, the outgoing senator, did, he led the Democrats, did something right. It happens occasionally. He and the leader of the Republicans, McConnell, sat down, cut an agreement, went to the White House and the House of Representatives, said, this is it. You're doing it. No negotiation, no discussion. We cannot default on our debt. This is it. So you got to learn that Trump prides his negotiation. It's a little different in the political world because the deal is part of a continuum. There's no final thing. So if he realizes that there's going to be adjustments, he should do fine. He should do fine. But you got to, again, understand the region without being consumed by its norms.
Final question for you tonight from one of our attendees. And I think this will speak a lot to our students and to the young alums in the audience. What advice would you give where you are with all the success you've had in life that you know now that you didn't know when you were younger that you wish you knew?
Well, that is very interesting, but one of the dangers of that, when you look back and say, I wish I had done this or I wish I hadn't done that, yes, some are basic if you did some harm you shouldn't have done or something like that, but in terms of like a campaign that doesn't work, you go back, oh, if I maybe done this, maybe done that. But you also have to just remind yourself, if you did something differently, the world around you may have responded differently. We sort of assume everything is fixed, only we are changing. We're going to change. Others may respond differently. So in 96 and 2000 when I ran, if I'd done some things differently, most of my opponents may have woken up and said, we're going to respond to this and do something differently. So I think the thing is, rather than look back, I learned this from my father, yes, you learn from your mistakes, but know that since you are human, you will make mistakes. The key thing is how you handle those mistakes. I don't care how smart you are, I don't care how careful you are, you're going to stumble. Could be things that your fault or things that happen to you, something happened at the workplace or something, or spouse goes crazy. Things will happen, and how you respond is the key thing. And you learn, hopefully, from your mistakes. And so that's the way I'm going to answer it, because, yes, I can look back. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that. Should have been quicker on certain things and changing in the business. Maybe spent more time with some of the kids in certain areas. But you're never all going to get it right. And the key thing on the kids' side, my father liked to say, for those of you who maybe have kids or prospective parents, is just tell them the sign of a successful parent, successful parenting, is when he or she, when mom and dad becomes an embarrassment to the kids. Probably doing something right. It's inevitable. And by the way, at a certain age, you may become friends with your kids, but not until they become adults. There's going to be a natural tension. It's inevitable. And now that I'm on that subject, one final thing. To establish parental authority, my wife and I decided we'd pick one thing that we knew was absolutely arbitrary and unreasonable and insist on it. Our choice was no pierced ears until you're 18. The howls were constant, but it held. No pierced ears. We had 5 daughters. This is why. No pierced ears till you're 18. And a couple of them pierced them at 18, some didn't. But it was just establishing parental authority. That was arbitrary. But also strangely set the stage for when we talked about drugs and things like that, especially the mother. seemed to have a little more resonance and authority because we were taking charge. Kids don't like it, but part of them knows that they need guidance, even if they'll never admit it. The worst thing you can do is just take a laissez-faire attitude and let them go off. No, that's not a good formula. So be semi-unreasonable as long as you love them. As my father also liked to say, they will survive your best intentions.
Please join me in thanking Steve Forbes.
Thank you, Senator.
Really well done.